This lecture is the first lecture for Architecture 2351, Architectural Technology 1. And it's going to include discussion on what we call the design process. The focus of the lecture is going to be on the cognitive design process, but we're going to talk about how technology, how we construct a building, fits into the design process and should be considered. There are a number of design processes. You'll have faculty talk about a variety of different processes. The most common is the AIA, American Institute of Architects, traditional design process, which has 5 major steps: pre-design programming, schematic design, design development, construction documents, and then construction project observation. These are product focused. In other words, each one of those milestones has a product that must be delivered to the client, and it walks us through but it doesn't really tell us what happens or what is really done and how it's done. For that, I've developed another kind of look at the design process, and that's the cognitive design process. And that cognitive design process starts with the cognition of 4 major or primary stakeholders, people that have commitment to the project and some investment in it. The first of those, of course, is the client or the owner of the building. They're the ones who, of course, commission the design, commission the building, and are often the ones who pay for it. And then there are the users, the people who are actually going to use the building. In a personal residence, the user and the client may be the same person. But in most architecture, the user and the client aren't the same person. A good example of that is the university. The client for any building that's built on campus is technically the board of directors, our board. They're the official client. And the users, of course, are the students, the faculty, the administrators, the staff, and all those people. So there's a different distinction between a client and a user in that case. The fourth stakeholder is designers. And I say designers instead of architects, that while the primary designer is the architect in most cases of buildings, there are a variety of other designers, engineers, interior designers, landscape architects, who are engaged in part of that process. And they are, of course, a stakeholder in the design. And then the fourth one that often people forget about is the constructor, who's going to construct, actually make the building, right? And there are cases and conditions where all 4 of those positions may be one person. A good example of that is Thoreau and his house on Walden Pond. He was the client. He paid for the building, decided where to build it, and then he was also the user. That's where he lived for a period of time. And then he was the designer. He laid out the design of the building. And then he was also the constructor. He built the building himself. So those are rare conditions, but you could have all the primary stakeholders invested in one person. Normally, these categories are for different people or for different groups of people. There are other stakeholders too that we need to take into account often, and those may be consultants that we've brought in to advise us about different parts of the building. An acoustics consultant, for instance, in the case of a theater. Also, banks are often stakeholders that have to be considered and taken into the process because they're providing the money and the resources, the economic resources at least, to build the building. There may be investors, people who are put money into the process, for instance, in the case of multifamily housing. apartment complexes. The government is another stakeholder. Other contractors, other than the primary constructor, may be involved. And we could go on and on because there are often a number, but we need to be aware. What's key here is we always should be aware of who the primary stakeholders are in the design process and make sure that we're responding to those primary stakeholders. So let's talk about the cognitive design process. So we have our four primary stakeholders: users, clients, designers, and constructors. And the cognitive design process, well, what is cognition? It's the mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and the senses. Okay? And so that's cognition. And of course, cognitive refers or relates to cognition. So when we say the cognitive design process, we're talking about what's going on mentally. What mental actions are we taking place? There are basically two groups of mental action in the design process. One is what we call programming or the program. And the other side of that is, of course, the action of design. And you'll see in our little diagram up here, we've got the program and design. And then there are 6 stages of cognition, of mental action that take place in order to produce a design. Those 4 that are involved in programming are beliefs, values, needs, and goals. And then those that are actually involved in design are goals, plans, and actions. So let's look at the first one of these, is beliefs. Okay, and beliefs are the conviction of the truth of some statement or ideal. It is our recognition that some idea or thing is true and valid. Beliefs inform and set boundaries for our actions. If we believe the world is flat, for instance, we are not going to set off to sail the edge where we could fall to our demise. Columbus had to get beyond that belief of a flat world and believe that the world was round, and in order to be able to sail and not fall off the edge, right? Beliefs are mental constructs that we personally choose to accept about how we perceive the world. Think about that. They're mental constructs, things we construct in order to define how we perceive the world. Beliefs have nothing to do with objective truth. Okay, they are viewpoints we personally decide we want to think are true based on personal information and experiences that we've collected over our life. Okay? Beliefs are self-evident. In other words, they don't have to come from anywhere. They are self-evident propositions whose truth is understood through meaning without proof, what we call proof in the scientific community. At their most foundational, they are based on our perceptions of life. We develop a collective or shared beliefs, which are the underpinnings of culture. Our shared beliefs are what make up our culture, based on our collective experiences and shared knowledge. However, just because we collectively see something in a certain way does not intrinsically mean this is a clear reflection of reality. In the United States, one of the most fundamental beliefs is we hold these truths to be self-evident. Notice that Jefferson used that term, self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Beliefs are the foundation of what we value. Our values come out of our beliefs. Our beliefs are based on our perception, okay, our individual perception of life, which is based solely on our experiences and knowledge about life. Just because we see something a certain way does not necessarily mean that that's the way it actually is for others. The second stage, values, okay, What is a value? A value is a principle or a quality we intrinsically desirable or valuable, that we find intrinsically desirable or valuable. Uh, it also may be used as a verb as a way of rating of material and non-material resources as their usefulness or importance or general worth to us. Okay. Values come out of our beliefs. When we believe something, out of that becomes things that we value. If we believe in the sanctity of human life, we value human life, right? That becomes a value that comes out of that belief that life is sacred. Because we believe that all men are created equal and they are endowed with unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we value personal liberty and freedom. Okay, so as Americans, as United States, we believe that all men are created equal, that they're endowed with inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and therefore we value personal liberty and freedom. So from beliefs and our values, once we value something, okay, if we go back to that, we find this something intrinsically important, okay, then that creates needs, a physiological or psychological requirement for the well-being or advancement of an organism. In this case, normally in architecture, that organism is the person uh, or society. Okay? So we create needs because we value things. Once again, if we go back to the sanctity of life, if we find it sacred and important, then we value health and life, giving health. Therefore, it creates the need for doctors and clinics and nurses and people, health caregivers, and places to give and cure people. Okay, so that's an example of how our values then automatically create needs. Okay, because we value personal liberty and freedom, we determined we needed to organize a central government to protect those personal liberties and freedoms. So we created the Constitution, or we wrote a Constitution, which establishes our government and how it should be run to protect those freedoms. So out of that need for some kind of government to protect our freedom, we create goals. Okay, and what is a goal? A goal is an established end towards which we towards which effort is directed in order to attain a need. Okay, so we establish a goal to achieve a need. Okay, so if we value, for instance, transportation and having the ability to move around as we please, we may find that we need an automobile. And if we need an automobile, the next thing we have to do is establish a goal towards that end, right? To attain that need. And that is we need to buy an automobile, or maybe somebody might feel like they need to steal an automobile, and that becomes their goal, right? Is to obtain that automobile. Uh, we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Do ordain and establish the Constitution for the United States. So we felt like we uh, valued freedom, and we needed a government to protect us and protect our freedoms. And so, therefore, we established a goal of a constitution, okay, to create a constitution that would define how we govern ourselves. Uh, and then we established a plan, a way in which to uh, get that government, right? And what is a plan? A plan is a detailed formulation of a program of action to achieve an orderly arrangement of the parts of an overall design. So I'm not talking about a floor plan, okay? What I hear is talking about the bigger picture is a plan uh, to achieve an orderly arrangement of the parts of an overall design, in our case, in architecture, okay? Uh, the Constitution was that plan, and that plan, it took 21 years for it actually to be ratified by all 13 states. Fortunately, we didn't have 50 states at that time, or we would probably still be arguing over the Constitution and ratification of it. So, goals and plans, how do we get from goals to plans? Okay. When we transform goals into plans, we use synthesis to build relationships to develop concepts. Okay. Basically, this is the cognitive process that we use in order to develop the plans of a work of architecture. Okay. What's synthesis? Synthesis is the composition or combination of parts or elements so as to form a whole. Okay? So we take a variety of different spaces. We may take technology, structure, and we take those parts, okay, and we put them together in a way that we build a strong relationship between them in a way that the new thesis is stated. Okay, so the old thesis would be those elements or parts individually. The new thesis is our building. Okay. Um, to do this process, we create what are known as concepts. And a concept is an abstract or generic idea generalized from specific categories or instances. So we take the beliefs and values and needs and goals, okay, of our client, of our other designers, of the user, of the constructor, and we create a generic idea, a generalization for specific categories or instances. Okay, so we create a specific generalization of those values, needs, and goals, and come up with a concept. Okay. Then once we have a plan, okay, once you have established what the building is going to be, okay, or the design is going to be, the next thing we have to do is act, okay, is build the building. Okay? Really, the design process isn't complete until we've taken action to establish the building, okay, to build the building and then to occupy it. Okay, an action, the accomplishment of a thing, usually over a period of time, in stages, or with the possibility of repetition. Okay, that's an action, right? That's the noun. The verb is the process of implementing plans, where the design is taken into a state of physical existence and out of the realm of possibility. Okay, until we act, until we build the building, it's always a variety of different possibilities. It still isn't a finished design. Once we build it, then it becomes concretized, as Norman Schultz would call it. So, in the case of our Constitution, what we had to do, the action we had to take, of course, was to elect a president. So, in 1789, the first U.S. president was elected. George Washington was sworn in on April the 30th. So let's talk about some other things about the design process. and some things I want you to be clear on is that you don't get good buildings from process. Okay, your faculty, the people you work for in an architectural firm are going to show you their process and how they get to design. But my experience has shown that Caldwell is correct, that we don't get good buildings from going through some kind of process. We get good buildings from good designers. Okay. Uh, and what's a good designer? A good designer is an informed designer, not a mechanical process. Generates superior design solutions. The other thing we should remember is design is fundamentally an intuitive process. Okay, it is subconscious. Uh, in most cases, a lot of the process of design, a lot of the synthesis, okay, is often an intuitive, and it is an intuitive process. It happens uh, below the conscious level, right? Uh, it's informed by the design team's knowledge, biases, feelings, and insights. And that's one thing we need to remember is that we bring to the design team, brings to the process knowledge, but it also brings a lot of biases, okay, and feelings, emotions, uh, and as well, we hope, insights. A misinformed intuition, okay, if your intuition is misinformed, produces misinformed design. So, an important part of the programming part of design, okay, the cognitive design process, is informing our intuition, okay? The primary purpose of pre-design and programming is to inform the design team's intuition. Well, who's this design team? Well, the fact is design is a team sport. It's often presented as an individual act. You know, we focus on the great designers, whether they be Mies van der Rohe, Frank Lloyd Wright, Renzo Piano, um, who else? Uh, Whoever we consider, and then normally we focus on those individuals. The fact is those buildings that they designed uh, were built with and designed from a design team. Okay, and that your design team, okay, is the client, the user, engineers, constructors, interior designers, landscape architects, all have to be as committed to the design goals as you are. Okay, and that's why design goals are so important in establishing at the beginning, because if you do not have buy-in, then what happens is the design will start to fall apart. The way a designer first perceives the problem to be solved controls nearly all solutions. This is a really important idea because your first perceptions of your first intuitive first perceptions of what the problem is or what the design is supposed to be controls nearly all your solutions. Okay, it's a way that we mentally discard and start to refine our ideas of what the work of architecture is. The first perception sets the design process, guides design decisions, and serves as the basis for the justification of the final design. If the first perception is misinformed, so is the solution. And that's really important to remember. Okay? So, our next lecture is going to be over the value spheres of architecture.